Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Kean University. On behalf of Dr. Kapowitz and the Human Rights Institute, I would like to welcome you to our wonderful campus. The mission of the Human Rights Institute at Kean University is to raise awareness to human rights violations and to inspire action to combat the injustices done worldwide. The Human Rights Institute sponsors a broad range of programs and activities, including courses and seminars, conferences, and gallery exhibits. When Andriy Mertrushi approached Dr. Kapowitz, the acting director of the Human Rights Institute, with a proposal to host a conference about Chameria, it was immediately apparent that such a conference would be in keeping with our mission. American students and citizens in general should learn about the atrocities that occurred in the Balkans in the previous century, and the Human Rights Institute should facilitate a discourse on peaceful resolution of these long-standing conflicts. I would like to invite you to return to the Kean University campus in the future and visit our Human Rights Institute gallery, and attend our International Human Rights Conference on March 9, 2012. It will deal with the ending of the oppression of women in developing countries. Please go to the Kean University homepage on www.kean.edu to look for the Human Rights Institute link. It is now my dearest pleasure to introduce the person who had the vision and dedication to create our Human Rights Institute and who supports and inspires our programs, the president of Kean University, Dr. Dawood Farahi.
They gave me a whole speech. It's going to last about an hour and a half, 40 minutes. Whatever it takes. I mean, she's actually willing to listen to an academic for 40 minutes, right? No, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to speak from the heart to you in a very short. I know a little bit about the history of Chameria. I know what happened in 1912 and again in 23 and again in 44 and 45. I know that 5,000 people, mostly women and children, were killed in one swoop. And I know 4,000 people are still missing and unaccounted for. And I know that slice of Chameria that was cut and given to Greece, the problems it caused, and the hundreds of thousands of people that were affected by it. My apologies to my colleagues from England, Jim Whittaker, but the English had something to do with it. Just a tiny little thing. And as a matter of fact, if you look around the world, the English had something to do with almost most of the 20th century conflicts. I originally come from Afghanistan. So one day in 1904, Sir Mortimer Durand, again an English gentleman, just look at those mountains and says, okay, that's where your border is going to be. So about 1/3 of people like me actually live in Pakistan. 2/3 live in Afghanistan. And as you know, all of these wars, and somebody says to the other guy, why don't you stop the border incursions? Well, you can't stop it because there's 750 miles of borders of identical people. People that look the same on both sides of the border. As a matter of fact, my ancestors come from both sides of the border. And nobody recognizes the border that was created there. And it has caused, in the last century, over 1 million deaths in that part of the world. In addition to that, 1 of every 3 refugees in this whole world comes from my old country, Afghanistan. Over the age of 30, either has lost a limb, a neck, a shoulder, and half a leg. Now, why am I telling you? Because it may not not be that related to Chameria. It is. This is what we did 7 years ago when I became president. The first thing I said I will do is to create a human rights institute. It's the largest of its kind in the eastern United States. We also have a Holocaust Resource Center, which is one of the oldest in the United States. And that complements one with the other. We do conferences here each year that attracts over 1,000 people to those conferences. We actually here at Kean University raised more money to buy solar cookers for Darfur than any other university in the country. A $15 solar cooker could prevent a woman from getting raped or killed. That's how simple it is. Now, I want to tell you, as a friend, that we do Holocaust and genocide conferences. We did one on Bangladesh that nobody paid attention to. We did one on child slavery, where very few people pay attention to. We did one on Armenia. We did one on Nigeria. And the list is about. My hope is that you do two things. Two very simple things. One is your cause would never be accepted by others if you are the only one proposing the cause. Meaning, every now and then, all people that have some kind of a connection with Chameria get together. They haven't seen each other. They talk to each other. They hug each other. Then they go over New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and maybe come back every 2 or 3 years later. That is not working, and it will not work. The same thing that I have told to my Jewish friends, and they now understand it. They had a little difficulty when I created the Human Rights Institute. They thought that may overshadow our commitment to the Holocaust. It did not. It will not. I said to them, and I think they are in agreement now, is that if you don't have a feeling for injustice for all, injustice will happen to you. It's just that simple. I've been to Jerusalem, and I don't know whether some of you have been there or not. The Nazis killed close to 1 million kids of Jewish origin. Why? Because they were Jewish, right? Just think about it for a second. That they may have killed somebody that could have cured cancer. They may have killed somebody that could have invented a new solution to energy. And then they killed 6 million people because they were Jewish. They actually burned them with gas. Now, others have done that because you're a Muslim. Well, you're Muslim, then you're not as good as a Christian, so this is purely justified to do that. So all the other people stand over there and say, well, that's not me. And walk away. But it is later on you. It is later on you. And the second thing I want to tell you is that every generation that goes by loses track of what happened with the previous generation. My daughter knows less about where I come from and what happened than the average Kean student. I keep telling her that you need to remember this, or the second generation of the Holocaust survivors. Or maybe somebody is a Chameria survivor. The next generation knows less and less about it. Even when they come to a conference, they're more concerned about how long they have to stay here before they can text message the minute they get out of the door. That applies to my daughter, that may apply to your son. And the whole thing changes. You come to a country that safety is very different from where we started, all those things change. And 2-3 generations from now, somebody would say, what happened in Chameria? What the hell is this? Where is it? Oh, somewhere in Albania, like southern Albania, northern Greece, somewhere in that area. So what happened? Now, how many of you actually know that Genghis Khan burned down my native country to the ground and killed over 2 million people? How many of you know that? You don't. Because it happened in the 1500s. Right? It happens all the time. My third suggestion to you is that you should come to things about human rights, to see other people and tell your story with them. That's the only way to bring the issue that is of importance to you to their attention. None of you would be here if Chameria was not important to you, would you? None of you would be here if that atrocity hadn't occurred. But you're talking to whom? You're talking to yourself. You really are. You are talking to yourself. So you need to get involved in all things, as many as you can, that has something to do with human rights. There is no difference between a child that was born in Afghanistan and was killed by a bomb of a drone of an American plane, or the little child in Chameria that died in 1912. No difference. Or the Jewish kid that died in 1938 under Hitler. No difference. And if you could recognize that you put these things together, talk to people, come to these events, tell them about Chameria, then you can do something. Well, look at the issue, for instance. You know it better than I do. It never made it to the paper until 2001, right? Nobody, no American paper even mentioned Chameria. She showed up in 2001 like a blip and went away. And I also want to suggest that this university will do that if you want to. And we will give you the space for it if you want to. Bring yourself, your kids, and your relatives once a year to an event that you design, to the food that you bring in from your houses. Just stay together for 2-3 hours to put that idea back in the brains of your 18-year-old grandkids. We have places here that we will provide it for you at no cost, that could accommodate 700 people, 2,000 people, you just name it. We will provide the space for you. Come spend a day or half a day. Bring your music, bring your fashion show, whatever it is, Janine will make sure that we'll do it for you. You know why I want you to do that? Because it keeps your culture alive. Your culture alive. I hate to keep repeating the same thing, but the culture that you have on your son is lost 1/3. On their granddaughter is lost 2/3. It's just it is. That is the fact of life. But if you maintain that culture, you maintain the beauty and the unique nature of an Albanian Muslim or a Chamerian patriot. And then you would actually love spending that half a day together. You would forget. You go over there and you come over here. I notice you like I notice my own people when they come to events that we have had done. You haven't seen each other for a year. Oh, how are you? How are you doing? Hugging each other. Boom, gone for another yes, right? Maybe a phone call or maybe an unfortunate event like somebody passing away, they might show up for the event. But keep the culture alive. Your culture is as beautiful as the one I come from. keep telling my daughter that your father is pretty good.
Ka nevoj fare për këtë, gjejmë si na di mendimin, kështu që të dashur miq, të dashur bashkëpatriot, të gjithë jemi së bashku këtu, jemi kontribus për zgjidhjen e çështjes Çame. Dhe është për kënaqësi për mua që marr pjesë në këtë eveniment kaq të rëndësishëm dhe historik që po bëni ju këtu. Përdesë u mbjelli këtu, për diskutuar në lidhje për këtë çështje, do të thonë se ka zgjidhje. Ju që jeni këtu, nuk jeni të gjithë Çame. Ju jeni dhe dashamirës të zgjidhjes së çështjes Çame. Çamët janë shkullur me forcë nga vatrat anëtare, ashtu si pemet e rënda nga një breg lumi, ku ai del jashtë shtratit të vet. Sepse Çamët besojnë edhe tek e pamundura. Ju jeni studiues gjakftotë, që nuk keni emocione dhe interesa në lojë në lidhje me këtë çështje. Dhe ndërsa ju thoni se ka zgjidhje, ne ju besojmë ju dhe na shtohet shpresa. Pse? Ju e dini dhe njihni rastet e ngjashme të spastrimeve etnike, të genocideve në pika të ndryshme të globit. Ju e njihni kuadrin ligjor ndërkombëtar. Rastet e shumta të trajtuara në dispozicionet juridike ndërkombëtare. Ju e njihni shumë mirë historinë e vërtetë të genocidit të popullsisë Çame në Greqi. Ju nuk jeni viktimë e fushatave manipuluese të shtetit që i përzuri Çamën, që ja zgjersoi sipas një plani genocidial me disa varë të ndryshme për gjatë shekullit 20. Është provuar shpesh në Ballkan, se e drejta ka kaluar shpesh në krah të shkelësit të saj, sepse shkelësit kanë patur propagandën me vete. Kështu ka ndodhur me serbët, me grekët, të cilët investojnë shumë në propagandë. Shteti ynë që duhet të na merrte në mbrojtje, Shqipëria komuniste s'kishte as fuqi, as dëshirë që të mbronte dhe të përhapte të vërtetën tonë. Ju të nderuar studiues e keni kuptuar të vërtetën e popullit tonë. Është një popull që u përzu me forcë, që u vra, që u dhunua vetëm si takonte një feje dhe një kombi tjetër. U përzu sepse ishte shprehje e një klase të pasur, që kontrollonte veriun e Greqisë, ishte nevojshme që të përzihej, sepse kështu merrej pronësia dhe mitet antike të Dodonës. Mbi këngët, mbi muzikën e mrekullueshme Çame, që është themeli i identitetit tonë si popull Çame. Unë doja të thoja me gjithë atë diçka. Ne si popull na duhen shumë ajo që ju bëni. Ne deri tani kemi ecur vetëm me emocione, me amanete, por pa ditur se ç'duhet të bëjmë. Ju po na jepni busullën në dorë. Ama drejt zgjidhjeve duhet të shkojmë vetë. Nuk ka zgjidhje juridike pa angazhim politik. Ne besojmë se po vinë kohë më të mira që Shqipëria ta riparaqesë këtë çështje sërish në kontakte diplomatike me fqinjët tonë. Ky fqinjë sot po dobësohet dëmtarisht. Nuk mund vetëm të kërkojnë ndaj nesh regjistrime të drejta imagjinare për minoritetet të krijuar me zonë në vendin tonë, kur nuk pranon asgjë për ne, dikush shtetas grek. Shqipëria nuk mund thot thjesht që ekziston traktati i Nicës dhe bashkëpunimit reciprok dhe nenit 15 të tij. Ai nen duhet zbatuar. Ai nen duhet të shoqërohet me një ligj ad hoc në Greqi, që zbatohet vënia në vend e së drejtës së Çamëve në Greqi. Nevojitet një trajtim ligjor i këtij problemi, sepse nuk ka mundësi që të kemi trajtime individuale të rasteve të dhunës, grabitjes, vrasjeve të Çamëve në Greqi. Ne presim që Greqia të kërkojë një lloj ndjese për atë që ka bërë. Ne presim që në këtë zgjidhje graduale pajtuese për çështjen çame. Pra, një ligj që parashikojë afate për kompensime, riadësime të atyre që dëshirojnë, madje dhe në përputhje me ligjet greke të riadësimit të migrantëve politik që u miratuan në vitet 70-80. Sot ne kemi instrumenta në dorë për patur sukses në kërkesat tona. Ne kemi një parti politike. Ne kemi një shoqat rreth 20 vjet krijuar. Ne kushëzojmë qeverisjen në vend, ne kemi krijuar shpresë tek popullsia jonë. Ne kemi treguar të gjithë popullit shqiptar të rinjve se plaga e popullsisë çame kullon ende gjatë. Ndaj, ne besojmë se do të ketë zgjidhje problemi çam. Na duhet ndihma juaj. Dhe besojmë shumë në titullet tuaja. Nuk mund mbetet pas zgjidhje me këto ligje ndërkombëtare një problem si yni. E drejta vonon, por nuk mënon, thot populli shqiptar. Të dashur vëllezër, unë personalisht dhe gjithë ne kemi në Shqipëri, kemi fat që kemi këtu, si çam dhe jo çam. Dhe kjo nismë që keni marrë është një nga nisma shumë mira, por duhet bërë më shumë. Ju keni një fat që jeni këtu dhe i bërë dhe shtetës amerikan, ke një shtet ku liria dhe drejtat e njeriu zbatohen më së miri se në gjithë vendet e botës. Kështu që ndihma juaj dhe kontributi juaj është i domosdoshëm. Ne me të vërtet kemi lobuar Parlamentin Evropian, Këshillit të Evropës, Departamentin Amerikan, me kongresmen, me senatorë, me gjithë. Po mendoj që ju jeni këtu afër, me 100 afër, juve duhet të shtoni rrugën e vet, ta kemi rrugën më të lehtë. Po kjo punë do angazhim. Vështirësi ka, por si shtam, ne nuk mund ta marrim veten tonë. Pa ato ndodhirat dhe gjenocid që kanë ndodhur, ne do të kemi parasysh një gjë që gjithë orkestra që ne kemi bërë në takimet me ndërkombëtarët, ne nuk kemi thjesht për provë, dhe ta keni mendje mbledhur. Ne edhe kërkojmë që thjellim shtetin grek në gjyqin ndërkombëtar pa gjenocid, ato njerëz pa fajshëm, fëmijë, gra, pleq, ky është qëllimi jonë. Ne çamët nuk dorëzoni, dhe nuk kemi dorëzuar. Ju pa kohë mund keni këtu, disa kanë shumë kohë, prapë keni ngritur shtëpitë dhe batat tuaja. Prandaj edhe një herë kërkoj ju gjithëve, si ky seminar që bët, është mirë që t'jenë historian tuaj, Amerikanë, ne t'i angazhojmë, si që është rasti i James Pittiferit, i cili po kontribon me gjithë Miranda Vikës, janë dy studio shumë mirë, por unë tash dua t'ja përkthej ky djali anglisht, Jamesit, ja kam bërë një kërkesë disa herë për të bërë këtu. Për gjithë këtë padrejtësi gati një shekullore, që ka popullsia çame, shteti anglisht ka dhe i përgjësit e vete. Kështu që i kërkoj prapë Jamesit dhe Mirandës në arshivrat angleze të punojnë sa më shumë, për të nxjerrë materiale sa më shumë, që të dalë e vërteta mbi këtë gjenocid dhe ai spekullim që ka bërë shteti grek duke pasur në krah sistemin diktaturës së Shqipërisë, që kanë qenë bashkëpunëtor fashizmit, ajo as ka ekzistuar dhe as ekziston. Ne e kemi nxjerrë maskët, shtetit grek, si Parlament Evropian, si Këshilli i Evropës, si Departamenti i Shtetit Amerikan, si Kongresi Amerikan, por nuk bëhet kjo punë një herë në vite ku i thonë. Kjo punë do në mënyrë institucionale, do argumenta, do dokumenta, që neve këtë shtet spekulativ, siç është Greqia, të ndryshojnë ndërkombëtarët dhe ta ndërgjegjësojnë, siç kërkojmë neve, nëpërmjet mjetëve demokratike, që kjo punë të zgjidhet sa më parë. Ju falenderoj gjithëve dhe ju uroj shëndet edhe sa më shumë punojmë për zgjidhjen dhe permanente e familjes tonë. Gjithashtu familjes së dashur pa përmendur, dua të falenderoj për pjesëmarrjen e tij kryetarin e Vatrës Gjon Buçej, me gjithë kryesinë e tij, Kean, ka qenë gjithë bankat të qatit Chameria, do të jenë dhe kontributi i tyre është i domosdoshëm për ne. Ju falenderoj gjithë.
Faleminderit, Dr. Muadini. I want to thank to you, to Dhaka, that spoke for helping us to make this conference and to discuss about our rights. I want to say something about what happened to me and to my family. On June 27, on June 27, 1944, I was only 7 years old. But I can never get off of my mind what happened to my family and to all the Albanians' family in our city, Paraneti. It was early morning when our lovely mother woke us. Her lovely voice this day was different. It was It was a hoarse voice. And she said to us, please get up and dress yourself soon. We have to go. She said hurriedly. She dressed our little sister Mazbule and packed some clothes for her. Without eating anything, we got out of our home. Our home is located on the top hill of the city of Parantia, close to Bolatis Tower, which is more than 400 years old and today is a museum. As we got out, we heard many gunshots. With hurried footsteps, we managed to arrive to our uncle house, Mohammed Bakr's house, close to the city clock, on the center of the city. Auntie Nasibe, despite being afraid of being polluted, opened the door and embraced each of us with love, as usually she did for us. Knowing that we are hungry, she prepared food for us. As we were sitting around the table, my mother's first cousin, Uncle Kazim, entered the room addressing to my father with a worried look. Bravo, please, what you are doing here? You don't know that Serbs started killing? Dress yourself and let's leave quickly. But my lovely father replied to him that it's impossible for him to leave all his family behind. He saying that never we did anything wrong to the Greeks. In opposite, we helped them in any time. After that, Uncle Kazim left and he escaped and died in Tirana in 1983. Less than half an hour passed and we heard knocks on the main door. My father went to answer the door, but the armed man grabbed him as he was barefoot. We started to cry, terrified about never seeing our lovely and careful father again. I'll never forget his terrible kidnapping and the precious advices he gave me as a child. I later found out that they killed him at the schoolyard, and together with others, he had been buried in a massive grave. After grabbing us, our mother took us to return to our home. As we were working, my older brother, Ferhat, 13 years old, he left from us to go to meet his cousin, Agni, 13 years old. But during the road, hidden in one bramble bush, the Zevis had killed him, 13 years old. And he was the pride of us, because 13 years old, he was the best student in this Albanian school that was opened the last years. After we go to our home, but entering to our yard, terrified, my sight was determined. When I found our grandfather's blood-stained body lying on the ground, lifeless. The Zerva soldiers has dragged him tumbling down the stony steps and killed him. He was 82 years old. Was retired imam. Greek writer Yannis Charas, in his book Historia της περιοχής Igumenitsas, published in Athens in 1985, confirms that crimes, and in this manner it's expressed, Moarembolatis family, massacred in a brutal manner, was completely innocent. After the terrible scene, our lovely mother sheltered us on the religious building in our neighborhood. It was a madrasa building before. There we found a lot of other frightened families. Less than an hour passed, and an armed person ordered us to get out from the rooms, and one another person stay outside with machine gun and waiting the order to kill us all. Our poor mother hugged us with a gentle voice and started to pray to God for mercy. Some minutes later, another service came, ordering the machine gunner to pick up the gun and to go to another place. And in this moment, we suppose that thanks God were set, but it was not so. A zealous official came and picked my mother. She picked my lovely mother. Terrified, she pulled out from her chest the only photo of my just killed father, and with her last wish, asked him to keep the photo as something sacred. Less than an hour, somebody came and told that my mother, Betula, 36 years old, was killed inside of Bolatis Mosque. Remained with 4 orphans. My sister, 10 years, brother, 5, me 7, and little sister, Magdule, 2 years old. Together with more than 235 people, gathered to a Mueddini house. Mueddin is our president of Party of Justice and Unit, who founded the first party that go to European Council and talked about the massacres that was done in Chameria. Now he's between us. And his big home was transformed to a jail or to concentration camp with 10 to 15 people slept together on the floor. For us, start to take care of our auntie, Zubide. Her husband, 27 years old, was killed and left her with baby Tassin, 3 months old. Here has to be emphasized that some neighbors, friendly women, came with a cradle for Tassin and brought clothes and household items from our homes. It was a great help for us in the sorry plight the service put us. The neighbors were in desperate position with our situation. They knew our innocence, but it wasn't in their hands to free us. They are Christians. So this is the more important to say that we are never no different between Muslims and Christians, because all we are still Albanians and all respect and love each other. The lack of food and absence of minimal living condition were the cause of diseases and untimely deaths. So every day, 2 or 3 people died. My grandmother, here, 72 years old, died in the same day with my sister, Magdule, 2 years old. Several months later, some British soldiers arrived and brought to us food and medication. So life in concentration camp started to be better. At the end of November, they started to ask us if we want to be transported to Turkey or to Egypt or to England, but no. All we in one voice told them that we are Albanians and the only country that we want to go is Albania. And a few days passed, and they brought 2 uncovered trucks. As we were being loaded on the truck, the friendly woman appeared again. They had brought for us some winter clothes. When the truck started to move, they stood by looking to us with despaired face. It's very important to remind that these friendly women were Christians. Some Greek liars claimed that the genocide was done against the Muslim Albanians, but it wasn't right. They also killed attorney Spiro Chaluka, a Christian, but he always felt himself Albanian. Albanians in Chameria, Muslim or Christians, respected and loved each other. We haven't married each other. The Christian chums, even today, do not consider themselves Greeks. They name themselves Romani. The Romani, as Albanian descendants from Illyrians, who during the Roman Empire embraced Christianity, the same as the Albrecht in southern Italy today. Trucks arrived in Gumenica and unloaded us in the seaport storage house. During the night, the rebels tried to enter in the storage to abduct the girls, but we started to cry loudly. So the British soldiers saved us again. It was the last night terrible with Zerdis. The next morning, we embarked on the 4 small boats, and the afternoon arrived in port of Sananda. There, I Uncle Mohammed, who in June himself found in Parga to his sister's home, joined us. After passing a night in Saranda's mosque, we were transported to Himara. In Himara, we rented 2 horses, but me and him had to walk. Walking during all the day long. The night, we found ourselves near a small bridge. After collecting some sticks, made the fire to pass the night under the bridge. In reality, it was December, so it was very cold, especially my weakened brother, with a bad cold, high temperature, felt very hungry. Even today, it remains in my mind. He's begging for bread. Crying, he asked my auntie, please, please, my dear auntie, I am so hungry, please, a piece of bread. I love you so much. But unfortunately, in these houses that under the bridge, there were no bread, no kind of bread was. It was daylight tomorrow morning, then we started to walk again, and after 3 hours, arrived at the village of Duka. There, for first time, I see something unexpected, a very warm welcome. And the last year, one of Albania's deputies in the parliament, Chameria, on the same place that we meet the residents of Dukat, is grew a monument of thank you to the residents of Dukat for accepting us for the charity. Partisans gave us a lift on their car, taking us to the Vlora. As we arrived there, my auntie took my very sick brother to the hospital, and he, 5 years old, the next day passed. So from 9 members in our family, remained only 2. My sister, 10 years old, and me. My sister grew up in our uncle's house, and me in orphanage of Tirana, and after in board school in Shkodra, and graduated in 60 in Czechoslovakia. This is only part of the genocide what the Greek chauvinist armed gangs perpetrated, starting in Parantia in June 1944 and finished in Pilat in March 1945. During this time, more than 2,900 innocent Albanian people were killed, and more than 2,000 others passed away while walking toward Albania. The majority of them were children and elderly people. On the documents of the U.S. Department of State, number 84/3, Tirana Mission 1946 states, according to all information I have been able to gather on Cham issue, in 1944 and during the first months of 1945, the authorities in northern Greece perpetrated savage brutality by evicting more than 25,000 Chams, residents of Chameria, from their homes where they had been living for centuries, and chasing them across the border after having robbed them and killed, because the majority of them, refugees, were old folk and children. The real intention of the genocide were seen on the letter on the Greek General Zervas, the bloody-thirsty person who led the massacres. In a letter directed to his collaborator in those crimes, Janis Danis, in 1953, he confirms, "We have to feel proud for what did, to clean Chameria with Germans, but it was part of the Greek nationalist strategy against Albanians. Unfortunately, last year, 66 years after this thing, thanks to American citizenship, I returned to my homeland. My wife, Bulet, and my cousin, Tassim, were both infants where their fathers killed. I also entered for the first time. We saw that the mass grave of hundreds of innocent people of 1944 was transformed into a concrete field study. This means only one thing: ethnic cleansing, and genocide was not accidental. It was prepared decades by the Greek chauvinists. And this is the reality that until today they try to do the same thing for the southern Albania. This is all. Thank you.
Faleminderit shumë. Thank you, Mr. Balati. Briefly, I will cover something in Albanian, just to touch a little bit what Dr. Farani said and why we're here today, so we can have a meaningful discussion on the topics of Chameria, of the Chameria issue. Ne kemi deklaruar dhe nuk duhet ta mbajmë semi për luftuar për të mbrojtur të drejtat e njerëzit si organizatë jo qeveritare. Dhe ne nuk angazhohemi me politikë. Minoriteti shqiptar i Chamerisë në Greqi nuk ka pse të ndahet në muslimanë e krishterë. Siç u theksua, të gjithë jemi shqiptar, edhe kjo është e vërtetë edhe është faktuar me vizitat që kanë bërë shqiptarët emigrantë në Greqi. E kanë parë që aty jetojnë për mira vjet shqiptar të fesë ortodokse që kanë ndjenjë vllazërore me ne dhe duan të kenë një vazhdimsi në lidhjet e tyre, qoftë personale, qoftë shoqërore. Grekët e bëjnë ndarjen dhe ne kërkojmë të drejtat minoritetit shqiptar në Greqi. Një pjesë e të cilit është masakruar dhe shpërngulur me dhunë. Ndërsa pjesa tjetër ende ndodhet atje ku mohon të gjitha të drejtat e të njohura për minoritetet, si gjuha, kultura e tjerë. Ne jemi shqiptaro-amerikan nga Chameria dhe kërkojmë që ta bëjmë të njohur problemin tonë. Mbasi t'ua bëjmë të njohur, do të kërkojmë në ndihmë juridike konform dispozitave ligjore ndërkombëtare për të gjetur mundësinë e zgjidhjes së çështjes Chame. Sot kemi ftuar zotin James Perifer, profesor James Perifer, një ekspert i mirënjohur botëror në lidhje me çështjen Chame edhe me volumtimet që bën me çështjet e Ballkanit. Kemi nderin sot ta ftojmë zotin Perifer. We welcome Professor Perifer, international expert on the Chameria issue and the Balkan conflict. Please welcome him with an applause. Thank you.
thank you very much for the invitation to the conference, which is an excellent thing. I think it's being held here and in this very fine university of Kean, which I've not visited before, and we've had the pleasure of hearing from the rector about the objectives of this institute. I'd also like to bring greetings to the conference from my friend and colleague Miranda Vickers in London, who, as I'm sure many of you know, has written some very penetrating and important material on the charm issue, which in the last 5 to 7 years I think has been very influential, particularly in Tirana, in helping get the position of the charms back on the international map. And I'm sure she'd like at some future point to come and talk to you. I'd like to say something today about work that I've been doing on the nature of how we see the history of Chameria. This may seem a very academic issue, but it is not simply a matter of interest, I think, to people in history or politics departments in universities, because the way we talk about the issue determines how the discourse goes of politics about solving it. Let us try to think back 200 to 300 years to the late Ottoman Empire. In the 18th century, from what we know, up until the rise of Greek nationalism after about 1770, Albanians and Greeks lived in a degree of harmony within the Ottoman system. And we know this not merely from sorry, is that better? Yeah. We know that Albanians and Greeks lived together in a degree of harmony under the Ottoman system. Albanians had a particularly prominent position, obviously in the Ottoman administration, because as Muslims they were able to take on social roles which Christian Greeks were not. And the region then really had two names. This map was made in about 1820 by a French visitor, and as you can see, the headline on top of it is Presbytère or Chameria. Presbytère or Chameria. And there was genuine multicultural existence right up to the Napoleonic period. But this, of course, changed with the turmoil in the Eastern Mediterranean and the beginnings of colonial rivalry between Britain and France for control of the Eastern Mediterranean. The coast of the Adriatic became very much more important to serious players in international politics, which at that time were primarily in Paris and in London. The Napoleonic Wars brought an intensification of these rivalries. There were important naval battles fought, which the biggest was the Battle of the Nile, which led to the beginning of British naval supremacy, which was never really lost for the rest of the 19th century in the Eastern Mediterranean. The French were defeated. We saw, though, during this period, intense intrigues in Epirus and Chameria between British and French interests at the court of Ali Pasha Tepelena. There are some remarkable works of record, of course, of this period, in the poetry of Lord Byron, in the memoirs of people like Hobhouse, and most of all, I think, in that of the French spy Tocqueville. He gives a very good picture of the complexities of Ali Pasha's system and what it represented. Ali Pasha sought to establish a long-term kingdom for himself in Epirus. We know what happened. This collapsed. He intrigued with the Sultan in Constantinople. It was also abandoned in many ways by the French because the French had been defeated in the naval warfare. And the British were mainly interested in the progress of Greek nationalism and the possibility of the formation of an independent Greek state, which duly took place in this very soon period, very soon afterwards. So during all this time, the Albanian Cham population was undergoing life through enormous turmoil and change. And the concept of Chameria began to disappear. This map, as I've said, was made, I think it was published anyway, I think in 1821 in Paris, but it was actually made, I think, sometime before that. And the name on it, I think, would not have appeared at the top had it been made in, say, 1840. Because by this time, British supremacy in the Eastern Adriatic was total. The Ionian Islands had been formed in protectorate as part of the British Empire. This was Corfu, Lefkas, Cephalonia, and the rest of them. And they were effectively British colonies. We should never forget how much the British Empire depended on the projection of naval power through shipping and the Royal Navy to secure its objectives. The epic defeat of the French at the Battle of the Nile had led to a British naval monopoly all along the coast of Albania. But it was something which was a very, very double-edged sword. As in Sally Balati's moving presentation, we saw the double-edged nature of British colonialism, the fact that British soldiers helped his family as refugees, but at the same time we know that British intelligence officers, like Woodhouse and so on, were tolerating, or possibly more than that, we don't know yet, documents are not available, but they were certainly aware of the very serious crimes of Zervas's soldiers in Epirus, and were prepared to work with Zervas because he supported he could be used in certain objectives in trying to defeat Greek communism and the Hellas partisan army. So the British role is very complex. In the same way, in the 19th century, in the Ionian Islands, there were reasonable civic freedoms for the Albanians living in those islands. This can be shown even today if you look at parts of northern Corfu with the survival of Albanian place names in a way they've not survived on the mainland in Epirus under the modern Greek government. So the way in which we talk about Chameria, I think, is conditioned heavily by these events. And the Greek intellectuals were able to establish a monopoly in discourse about the region. In other words, as I say, had this map been made 30, 50 years later, it would have only had one word on top, or anywhere on it, the Trespotia, not Chameria. And this situation, I think, has continued in different ways up to the present day. We know through the remarkable pioneering work of my friend in Istanbul University, Nurcan Ozgur Bakloğlu, just now, more or less, what happened with Albanian migrations to Turkey in the late 19th and 20th century. I think her new book, which I would recommend, unfortunately is still only in Turkish, but it should be translated and published in Albanian as soon as possible. But this shows, without any doubt, what happened to the Chams who went to Turkey, and in particular, it gives the numbers of people who were already being driven out of Epirus in the 1920s and 1930s, long before the events of the Second World War and the family tragedies that people like Sally have described. So there is a hidden history here, or a secret history. And this has been promoted, I think, for a variety of reasons. There is still a discourse in academic institutions against the Greek communists and what they represented. Now, this is entirely understandable, but it doesn't mean at the same time that Zervas should be regarded as anything other than the criminal he was. And this is not how, on the whole, his work is seen in the majority of research and publication. There is the issue of the British role, which I've started to investigate in my publication on Woodhouse and the Charms. And there is a much wider issue of what we know that can emerge from archival research, which my colleague Miranda Vickers has been involved in. We know, for instance, from material that's emerged from the Public Records Office in London, that British diplomats were well aware of some of what was going on, but because of the nature of the Greek Civil War, they felt unable to do anything about it. Now that obviously is quite an honourable position, but there may have been other things which were going on that were less honourable, but we don't know about that. But Britain has a special role, I think, then in the resolution of this issue. The current situation with Greece, I think, is important. Greece at the moment is suffering its biggest major setback in its position in the region, possibly in the whole of the 20th century, in the beginning now of the 21st century. Greece is not far, in some international eyes, over the financial crisis, from being regarded almost as a pariah state. Now, I'm not recommending that point of view. I think the Greek people need help, not condemnation. But there is an issue here. It has not been very widely noticed, for instance, that the problem of the name issue with Macedonia has been referred to now to the International Court at The Hague for resolution, something which Greece had never previously agreed with or been allowed to happen. The Chums, I think, now have a historic opportunity, a window of opportunity, to bring the Chameria issue to the forefront in a new way, because the hegemony and the dominance of Greek discourse, political, academic, historical, I think now is weakened considerably. And Greece has many, many critics in the international community. And there will be an audience, I think, for a re-evaluation of many of these events. I think it's particularly important in that sense that this conference is being held, because one of the things that, to my way of thinking, most needs doing is the publication of up-to-date, professionally produced research material. And it's very encouraging to see the research proposals which are being put forward. And it's also encouraging, I think, to see the interest in the young people. This is not now a campaign merely of the older generation who endured the sufferings they did. And I think the last last comment I'd like to make is that in terms of changing the discourse, as I say, this construction of geographic space against historic time, one of the biggest things is the question of audience. I would not wish to be critical of the Charm leadership in Tirana. We have a distinguished representative here. But I think sometimes the Charms have often appeared to be talking to other Albanians only, rather than the, many, many people who live nearby or are interested, and above all, people in Britain, because of the special British role in some of the original events. And I think there needs to be now a new initiative, both in academic discourse, but particularly in political discourse and organisation, to turn outward, to tell people who we have not reached before about the injustices of the past, and to put forward a way to resolve them in a progressive and democratic direction.
Për demokratizimin e Shqipërisë, për pavarësinë e Kosovës. Normal që shpeshherë kemi diskutuar edhe pjesën e Chamerisë, po tash duhet të angazhohemi pak më tepër. Unë me ju thënë të drejtën, u emocionova mjaft kur zoti Ballati e tregojti atë pjesë historikun që unë e kisha lexuar shumë më përpara, se u ktheva edhe në këtë pjesën e genocidit të Kosovës, se isha dëshmitare okulare e luftës në Kosovë. Kështu që dash zoti që ne kështu të bashkuar edhe gjithmonë të mlidhemi pak më tepër, pak si më tepër, të kontribojmë për çështjen çame. Në çështjet e përgjithshme kombëtare, por posaçërisht tash është ajo pjesa që ne duhet luftuar e matutje. Ju faleminderit për durimin që më dëgjuat. Unë kam një poezi për Chamerin në librin tim Ecje vertikalisht në për oqean. Mirë po, ajo që ka te unë ka qenë shumë sensitive, unë në vend se ta shënoj autobiografin time mrapa librit e kom qitë poezin për Chamerin. Chameris. Bashkë me ne ikin kohët në paktim. I madhë mbetet të mali në zemër, si që mbetet I lartë rapi I durimit dhe e pyes vetën. Deri kur me litar të shpresës do të lidhim qepallat e syve të blertë, që nuk mbyllën dot pa e pa Chamerinuse. Me ngjyrat e ylberit stolisim gërshetin. Kur do të mund ta mundi frigën që të ka motër? Deri kur më duhet të ruaj emrin, mbi rasat e moqme të vareve të rafshuara, nga stuhit Helene. Tash të ruaj në kujtimet e malit, që përmblon dhe besoj si në Zotin, se që të dyja jemi tokë arbrore.